Mira didn't know that the man watching her from across the courtyard was the most powerful alpha in the realm. She didn't know that he'd been searching for her his entire life, and she certainly didn't know that in less than an hour she would collide with destiny itself and change the fate of the kingdom forever. She only knew that she needed to stay invisible. The harvest moon hung fat and golden above the castle walls, casting everything in warm amber light. Tonight was the kingdom's most sacred celebration, the Harvest Moon Festival, and every soul in the realm had gathered to honour the season's bounty. Musicians filled the air with lilting melodies, while dancers spun in colourful circles around blazing bonfires. The scent of roasted meat and spiced wine mingled with autumn flowers, creating an intoxicating perfume that made even the servants smile. But Mira kept her head down as she hurried through the kitchens, her simple brown dress a stark contrast to the festival finery surrounding her. "Take these to the nobles' platform," Cook barked, shoving a heavy tray of wine goblets into her hands. "And for the love of the gods, try not to spill anything. We can't afford another disaster." Mira's fingers tightened on the silver tray. She knew what Cook meant. 3 years ago, during her first festival service, she'd tripped and shattered an entire set of crystal glasses. The head steward had made sure everyone knew exactly who was responsible. The bastard daughter of executed traitors. The girl who brought nothing but misfortune wherever she went. The memory still burned like acid in her chest. "Yes, Cook," she whispered, balancing the tray carefully. "I'll be careful." The woman's expression softened slightly. Cook was one of the few who showed her any kindness, perhaps because she understood what it meant to be invisible. "Stay near the edges, girl. Don't draw attention to yourself." Mira nodded and slipped through the servants' entrance into the festival grounds. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Where the kitchens had been all business and efficiency, the festival was pure magic. Thousands of people filled the great courtyard, their laughter and voices creating a symphony of joy. Ladies twirled in silk gowns that caught the moonlight like captured starfire. Lords stood in clustered groups, their rich velvet doublets and gleaming swords marking their status as clearly as crowns. And above it all, on the royal dais decorated with autumn wreaths and golden banners, waited the platform where she would serve wine to the kingdom's most powerful nobles. Mira's stomach clenched. She pressed herself against the stone wall and began working her way around the crowd's perimeter, just as Cook had instructed. Stay invisible, don't be seen, don't remind anyone that she existed. But as she moved through the shadows, something made her look up. A procession was forming at the far end of the courtyard. Royal guards in midnight blue uniforms created a corridor through the crowd, their ceremonial spears glinting in the torchlight. Behind them came the kingdom's highest nobles, each more magnificently dressed than the last. And at the centre of it all walked a man who made everything else fade into insignificance. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a black cloak that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Dark hair caught the glow of nearby torches, and even from this distance Mira could see the commanding way he carried himself. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the very air around him seem to shimmer with barely contained energy. The crowd parted before him without being asked. Nobles who moments before had been laughing and drinking now stood in respectful silence, their heads bowed as he passed. Children stopped their games to stare in wide-eyed wonder. Even the musicians played more softly, as if the very music was honouring his presence. Mira's breath caught. She'd never seen him before, but she knew who he must be. Only one man in the kingdom commanded such absolute reverence, the Alpha King. Something twisted deep in her chest as she watched him approach the royal platform. Not fear exactly, though she should have been terrified. Not attraction, though he was devastatingly handsome. Something else. Something that felt like recognition, impossible as that was. She shook her head sharply. Ridiculous! Men like him didn't even see girls like her. She was a shadow in a brown dress, carrying wine to her betters, nothing more. But as she forced herself to look away and continue toward the platform, she could have sworn she felt eyes on her, watching, searching. The crowd pressed closer as the procession reached the dais, and Mira found herself trapped between the stone wall and a sea of eager bodies, all straining to get a better look at their king. Panic fluttered in her throat. She needed to reach the platform, but the only way was through the crowd, and crowds meant being seen, being noticed, being remembered. She pressed her back against the cold stone, tray trembling in her hands. Maybe she could wait. Maybe the crowd would thin once the ceremony began, and she could slip through unnoticed. But then a group of young lords pushed past her, jostling for position, and the tray tilted dangerously. Wine sloshed toward the edge of the goblets. No, not again. Mira lunged forward, trying to steady the tray, but her foot caught on her long skirt. Time seemed to slow as she pitched forward, the silver tray flying from her hands. Wine arced through the air in glittering droplets, and she braced herself for the impact with the ground that would bring humiliation crashing down on her once again. Instead, strong arms caught her. The world stopped. Mira found herself pressed against a broad chest. Her hands splayed across midnight dark fabric that was softer than anything she'd ever touched. The scent of cedar and winter rain filled her senses, along with something else. Something wild and untamed that made every nerve in her body come alive. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading outward like golden honey through her veins. It was impossible, but she could swear she felt something responding in the man holding her. A pull, a recognition, a sense of coming home that made no sense and perfect sense all at once. Slowly she lifted her eyes, and looked directly into the face of the Alpha King. Up close he was devastating. Sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, framed features that belonged in legends. His hair was darker than midnight, shot through with traces of silver at the temples, but it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were the colour of storm clouds, grey and silver and blue all at once, and they were looking at her like she was the only person in the world, like she mattered. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep and rough, sending shivers down her spine. Mira tried to speak, but no words came. She was acutely aware that the entire crowd had gone silent, thousands of eyes focused on this impossible moment. The bastard servant girl caught in the arms of their king. She should pull away, should bow and beg forgiveness, and disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. Instead, she found herself drowning in those storm-grey eyes. She whispered, then stopped. What could she possibly say? How could she explain the way her heart was racing, or the golden warmth spreading through her chest, or the way every instinct she had was screaming that this was important? This was everything. "Your wine?" she finally managed, glancing toward where the tray had clattered to the ground, goblets scattered and dark liquid seeping between the cobblestones. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "I care nothing for wine." His hands were still on her arms, steadying her, and she could feel the warmth of them through her thin dress, could feel the leashed power in his touch, carefully controlled so as not to hurt her. When was the last time anyone had touched her with such gentleness? "What's your name?" he asked softly. The question hit her like a physical blow. Names had power. Names made you real, made you visible, made you someone who could be hunted down later and punished for daring to touch a king. She swallowed hard, fear finally breaking through the golden haze of whatever was happening between them. "I'm just a servant, Your Majesty, no one important." His brow furrowed, and for a moment she thought she saw something like pain flicker across his features. "Everyone is important." The words were spoken quietly, but they seemed to echo through her entire being. When was the last time someone had called her important? When was the last time someone had looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was precious? Never. The answer was never. Terror crashed through the golden warmth, cold and sharp and familiar. This was dangerous. This was impossible. Kings didn't catch servant girls when they fell, and they certainly didn't hold them like they were made of spun glass. Something was wrong. Something was happening that she didn't understand, and the only safe thing to do was run. "I have to go," she breathed, finally finding the strength to step back. His hands released her immediately, but she could swear she felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for disturbing you." She turned and fled. Behind her, she heard him call out something, but she couldn't make out the words over the roaring in her ears. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the scandalized whispers and pointed stares, focused only on reaching the safety of the servant quarters. But even as she ran, she could feel him watching her, could feel those storm-grey eyes tracking her movement through the crowd, and deep in her chest that golden warmth refused to fade. The days that followed were a strange kind of torment. Mira tried to lose herself in her usual routine of scrubbing floors and serving meals, but the golden warmth in her chest refused to fade. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, growing stronger whenever she thought of storm-grey eyes and gentle hands. She'd catch herself pausing in her work, one hand pressed to her sternum, trying to understand what was happening to her. She'd never felt anything like it. This pull, this ache, this sense that part of her was missing, and she knew exactly where to find it. It was impossible, it was dangerous, and it was driving her slowly mad. "You're distracted," Cook observed on the third morning, watching Mira stir the same pot of porridge for the 5th time. "Haven't been the same since the festival," Mira's spoon stilled. "I don't know what you mean." "Course you don't." Cook's knowing look made her stomach clench. "Just like you don't know why half the kitchen staff is whispering about what they saw that night." Heat flooded Mira's cheeks. She'd hoped that in the chaos and celebration no one would remember one clumsy servant girl, but servants saw everything, and they talked about it even more. "It was nothing," she whispered. "I fell. He helped me up, that's all." "Nothing." Cook snorted. "Girl, I've worked in this castle for 30 years. I know what nothing looks like, and I know what something looks like too." Before Mira could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and Thomas, one of the head steward's assistants, stepped inside. His usual harried expression was replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Where's Mira?" he demanded, scanning the room. Every eye turned to her. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm here." Thomas's relief was palpable. "Thank the gods, you're needed upstairs, now." The kitchen fell silent. Servants were summoned upstairs for only 3 reasons: to be promoted, to be punished, or to be dismissed. Given Mira's history, the latter 2 seemed far more likely. "What for?" Cook asked, stepping protectively closer to Mira. "Special service assignment," Thomas replied, but his eyes wouldn't meet Mira's. "Royal platform, tonight's feast." The golden warmth in Mira's chest flared so suddenly she gasped. She pressed her hand to her sternum, trying to steady herself. "The royal platform?" Cook's voice was sharp with concern. "Why her?" "Orders came from the top," Thomas said, "way above my head. She's to serve wine specifically at the high table." Mira's world tilted. The high table meant nobility. It meant being seen by the most powerful people in the kingdom. It meant standing within arm's reach of— "No!" The word tore from her throat before she could stop it. "I can't. Please assign someone else." Thomas shook his head. "Not my choice. Orders are orders." His expression gentled slightly. "Look, I know you prefer to keep quiet, but this is a good thing. Special assignments mean extra coin, and the gods know you could use it." Extra coin. The rational part of her mind knew he was right. She barely earned enough to pay for her tiny room in the servants' quarters. But rationality was hard to hold on to when that golden pulling in her chest was getting stronger by the moment. "When?" she asked quietly. "Sunset. Report to the head steward for instructions." Thomas turned to leave, then paused. "And Mira? Wear something nicer than that brown thing. You'll be visible tonight." After he left, the kitchen erupted in whispers. Mira barely heard them. All she could think about was those storm-grey eyes and the way they'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was important, like she was his. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made the warmth in her chest bloom like a flower opening to sunlight. Hours later, Mira stood before the great hall's massive oak doors, wearing her one decent dress, a simple grey wool that had belonged to her mother. Her hands shook as she balanced the tray of wine goblets, each one filled with the finest vintage from the royal cellars. Through the doors she could hear the sounds of the feast: laughter, music, the clink of silverware against fine china. The kingdom's elite celebrating another successful day of ruling over people like her. "Remember," the head steward said beside her, "eyes down, speak only when spoken to, and for the love of the gods don't spill anything." Mira nodded, not trusting her voice. The doors opened, and she stepped into a world of impossible luxury. The great hall soared overhead, its vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of ancient battles and legendary hunts. Hundreds of candles cast everything in warm golden light, making the silk tapestries glow like jewels. Long tables stretched across the room, laden with more food than she'd ever seen in one place. And at the head of it all, on a raised dais beneath the royal banner, sat the high table. Her feet carried her forward without conscious thought, guided by training and that ever-present pull in her chest. She kept her eyes fixed on the stone floor, counting her steps, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. 20 steps, 30, 40. She reached the dais and began to climb the shallow steps, tray held steady despite her trembling hands. Only a few more feet and she would... "You!" The voice stopped her cold, deep, rough, achingly familiar. The same voice that had asked if she was hurt, that had called her important. Slowly, Mira raised her eyes. He was even more devastating than she remembered. Tonight he wore midnight blue velvet that made his storm-grey eyes seem to glow in the candlelight. A simple circlet of silver rested on his dark hair, the only thing that marked him as king, though he would have commanded attention without it. Power radiated from him like heat, making the very air around him shimmer with barely leashed energy. But it was the way he was looking at her that stole her breath. Like he'd been waiting, like he'd known she would be here. "Your Majesty." The words came out as barely a whisper. She started to curtsy, nearly dropping the tray in the process. "Don't." His command was gentle, but absolute. "Don't bow to me, not you." Confused murmurs rippled through the nearby nobles. Mira's cheeks burned as she felt their stares, their curiosity, their judgment. She should say something, should explain that she was just here to serve wine and then disappear back into the shadows. Instead, she found herself drowning in those storm-grey eyes again. "What's your name?" he asked, just as he had 3 nights ago. This time, she couldn't run. This time, she was trapped by duty and position and the weight of 100 watching eyes. "Mira," she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. "Mira." He repeated her name like he was tasting it, rolling it around on his tongue. "I'm Darian." The casual introduction sent another wave of murmurs through the watching nobles. Kings didn't introduce themselves to servants. Kings didn't look at serving girls like they were the most precious thing in the room. "I know who you are, Your Majesty," she managed. "Do you?" There was something almost sad in his voice. "I wonder." Before she could ask what he meant, he rose from his chair. The entire hall fell silent, hundreds of eyes tracking his movement as he stepped around the table and approached her. "You ran from me," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Shame heated her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I was..." "Afraid." It wasn't a question. "I know, I could feel it." Feel it? What did that mean? But before she could ask, he was reaching for the tray in her hands. "Allow me," he said, taking it from her with the same careful gentleness she remembered. He set it aside, then returned his attention to her. "Walk with me." It wasn't really a request. Kings didn't make requests of servants, but his tone was asking, not commanding, and that somehow made it impossible to refuse. He offered her his arm like she was a lady instead of a kitchen girl. After a moment of stunned hesitation, she placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid warmth of him through the rich fabric. The hall parted before them as he led her toward a smaller chamber off the main room. She could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispered speculation following in their wake. Tomorrow the entire castle would be talking about this. Tomorrow there would be consequences. But tonight, walking beside this impossible man with her hand on his arm, she couldn't bring herself to care. The chamber he led her to was smaller and more intimate than the great hall, with a fireplace crackling merrily and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "Please," he said, "I know this is unusual, but I need to speak with you." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His smile was sad and beautiful. "Because 3 nights ago something happened that I've been waiting for my entire life, and I don't think you understand what it means." The golden warmth in her chest pulsed stronger. "I don't understand any of this." "I know." He moved closer, and she caught that intoxicating scent of cedar and winter rain again. "May I explain?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm an alpha," he began, "not just in title, but in truth. My kind, we have mates. One person in all the world who completes us, who balances our power and shares our soul." His eyes never left hers. "For 32 years I've searched. I've met countless women, hoping, praying that one of them would be the one. But nothing. No connection, no recognition, no—" "Golden warmth," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. His expression transformed, hope blazing across his features. "You feel it too." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Since the moment you caught me, like something inside me woke up. Because something did." He stepped closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "You're my mate, Mira. You're what I've been searching for." The words should have been impossible to believe, but they settled into her bones like truth, explaining the pull she'd been feeling, the sense of recognition, the way her entire world had shifted the moment he touched her. "But I'm nobody," she breathed. "I'm just a servant, the daughter of traitors. You're the king." Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or anger on her behalf. "You're not nobody. You could never be nobody." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "You're everything, Mira. You're my everything." The gentleness in his touch, the reverence in his voice, the absolute certainty in his storm-grey eyes. It was too much. After years of being invisible, of believing herself worthless, of knowing that she would always be nothing more than a shadow in borrowed dresses, this was too beautiful to be real. "I don't understand," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Why me? Why now?" "Because fate doesn't care about crowns or bloodlines," he said softly. "Because sometimes the most precious things come in the most unexpected packages. Because I've been waiting for you, and you've been waiting for me, even if neither of us knew it." A tear slipped down her cheek, and he caught it with his thumb. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know." His smile was infinitely patient. "But I'm not going anywhere. However long you need to trust this, to trust me, I'll wait. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't be what you need?" "You already are what I need." His voice was fierce with conviction. "You're my mate, my equal, my other half, everything else we can figure out together." The golden warmth in her chest bloomed brighter, pushing back the fear and doubt that had lived there for so long. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her and seeing not a servant, not a bastard, not a mistake to be hidden away, just her. And it was enough. "Stay," he said quietly. "Tonight, stay with me. Let me show you that this is real." She looked into his storm-grey eyes and saw infinite patience, absolute devotion, and something that might have been love. And for the first time in her life, instead of running, she chose to stay. The feast that followed was unlike anything Mira had ever experienced. King Darian, she still couldn't bring herself to think of him simply as Darian, had kept his word about showing her that this was real. He'd seated her beside him at the high table, his royal cloak draped around her shoulders like a declaration. The midnight blue fabric was softer than silk and warm from his body, and it carried his scent of cedar and winter rain. Every noble in the hall was staring. She could feel their eyes like brands against her skin, hear their whispered speculation rippling through the room like wildfire. But whenever the weight of their attention became too much, he would lean close and murmur something that made her forget everything else. "You're doing beautifully," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "Just breathe." She tried to follow his advice, but it was difficult when she was acutely aware of every fork she picked up, every sip of wine she took, every word she spoke. These people knew how to navigate this world of crystal and silver and complex etiquette. She was just a servant girl playing dress-up in borrowed finery. "Tell me about your work," Darian said, cutting into the silence that had fallen between them. Mira nearly choked on her wine. "My work? You spend your days in the kitchens, don't you? What's it like?" The question was so unexpected, so genuine, that she found herself answering without thinking. "It's peaceful, I suppose, busy, but there's something satisfying about creating something nourishing. Cook says I have good hands for bread making." His smile was warm and real. "I'd like to taste your bread sometime." The casual intimacy of the statement, the assumption that there would be a sometime, made her heart skip. "You can't mean that." "I never say anything I don't mean." His grey eyes held hers steadily. "Especially not to you." Before she could respond, a commotion near the hall's entrance drew their attention. The massive doors had opened, and someone was approaching the high table with purposeful strides. Mira's blood turned to ice. Lady Celeste Ravencroft swept into the hall like an avenging angel, her emerald silk gown trailing behind her and her golden hair pinned in an elaborate crown of braids. She was beautiful in the way that noble women were beautiful, polished and perfect and utterly untouchable. Behind her walked an older woman in deep purple velvet, her silver hair gleaming with diamonds and her expression carved from granite. The Queen Mother, Darian's aunt, regent before he came of age, and the most feared woman in the kingdom. Mira shrank back in her chair, pulling the royal cloak tighter around herself. She should run. She should disappear back into the kitchens where she belonged before. "Well, well," Celeste's voice rang out across the suddenly quiet hall. "What have we here?" The crowd parted before the two women like a tide. Nobles stepped aside, bowing respectfully to the Queen Mother while watching Celeste with avid curiosity. Everyone knew Lady Celeste. Everyone knew her beauty, her wit, her impeccable bloodline. And everyone knew her connection to the girl sitting beside their king. "Your Majesty," the Queen Mother said, inclining her head slightly toward Darian. Her cold blue eyes swept over Mira with undisguised disdain. "I see you found entertainment for the evening." "Aunt Margaret," Darian's voice had gone carefully neutral. "Lady Celeste, how good of you to join us." Celeste smiled, the expression sharp as a blade. "Oh, we wouldn't miss this for the world. It's not every day we see my dear half-sister dining at the high table." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Mira felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of eyes swivelled between her and Celeste, seeing the truth she'd hoped to keep hidden forever. "I half-sister," someone whispered nearby. but that would make her— "The bastard daughter of Lord Marcus Ashwood," Celeste continued, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "You remember Lord Ashwood, don't you? The traitor who tried to sell our kingdom's secrets to our enemies, the one who was executed for treason 3 years ago?" The words hit Mira like physical blows. Around the hall she could see understanding dawning on face after face. The whispers started as a trickle and quickly became a flood. A traitor's daughter. At the high table. Sitting beside the king. How dare she— Mira tried to stand, tried to flee, but Darian's hand closed gently around her wrist. Not restraining, just anchoring. When she looked at him, his expression was calm, but she could see the storm brewing in his grey eyes. "Lady Celeste," he said quietly, "you seem to be labouring under several misapprehensions." "Am I?" Celeste moved closer, her smile never wavering. "Please enlighten me, your Majesty. Tell us all how a traitor's bastard came to be wearing your cloak and sitting in a place of honour." "She's here because I invited her," Darian said simply. The Queen Mother stepped forward, her expression glacial. "Surely you don't mean to legitimise this association? The girl's father was a traitor. Her blood is tainted. She has no place among decent people." "Her father's crimes are not hers to bear," Darian replied, his voice gaining an edge that made several nearby nobles take a step back. Celeste laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but they are. Bad blood will tell, your Majesty. It always does. She's probably been working for our enemies this whole time, just like her father. How else do you explain her sudden elevation? What secrets has she been whispering in your ear?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Mira felt the weight of every stare, every whispered doubt, every judgment passing over her. This was what she'd feared. This was why she tried to stay invisible. "That's enough!" Darian's voice cracked like a whip, and power rolled off him in waves that made the very air tremble. Several nobles actually stepped backward, their faces pale with fear. But the damage was already done. Mira could see it in their faces, the suspicion, the disgust, the certainty that she didn't belong here, that she was a stain on their perfect world. "Your Majesty is too trusting," the Queen Mother said coldly, "too willing to see good where none exists. This girl is a mistake that needs to be corrected before it goes any further." "The only mistake," Darian said, rising to his feet, "is allowing this conversation to continue." But as he spoke, chaos erupted at the far end of the hall. The great doors burst open, and figures in dark cloaks poured through, moving with inhuman speed and grace. Their faces were hidden behind masks of black metal, but Mira could see their eyes glowing with an unnatural silver light. Shadow Court assassins. Screams erupted throughout the hall as the masked figures spread out, moving toward the high table with deadly purpose. Noble ladies shrieked and fled while their lords drew ceremonial swords that would be useless against supernatural killers. "Protect the king!" someone shouted, but the assassins weren't heading for Darian. They were coming for her. Mira understood in that terrible moment why they were here. Someone had sold information about tonight, about her presence at the high table, about her connection to the king. Someone had marked her as a target worth eliminating. The first assassin reached the dais, moving faster than anything human had a right to move. Mira saw the blade in its hand, saw death coming for her, and time seemed to slow. Then Darian was there. He moved between her and the assassin with fluid grace, and suddenly he wasn't quite human anymore. His eyes blazed with golden light, and when he bared his teeth, they were sharp as a wolf's. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, primal and ancient and absolutely terrifying. The assassin's blade met Darian's bare hand and stopped cold. With a sound like breaking stone, the weapon shattered. The assassin itself went flying backward, crashing through a table and scattering nobles like leaves. But there were more, so many more. They came from all directions, a tide of shadow and silver eyes and gleaming blades. Darian fought like something out of legend, moving faster than sight, but even he couldn't be everywhere at once. A smaller figure broke away from the main group, heading not for the king, but for the fleeing crowd, for a young noble girl who had frozen in terror instead of running. Without thinking, Mira threw herself forward. She tackled the child, knocking her out of the assassin's path, but the creature's claws raked across Mira's ribs as she fell. Fire exploded along her side, and she felt warm blood soaking through the grey wool of her dress. The assassin wheeled toward her, raising its weapon for a killing blow. It never fell. Darian appeared beside the creature like vengeance itself, and when his hand closed around its throat, the assassin simply crumbled, turned to ash that scattered on the suddenly still air. The remaining attackers took one look at their king, at the alpha who had claimed his mate and would destroy anything that threatened her, and fled. Silence fell over the devastated hall, broken only by the crackle of overturned candles and the quiet sobs of terrified nobles. Mira lay on the blood-slicked floor, one hand pressed to her wounded side, and looked up to find Darian kneeling beside her. The golden glow was fading from his eyes, but the fierce protectiveness in them remained. "You're hurt," he said, his voice rough with barely controlled violence. "The child," she whispered. "Is she safe because of you?" His hands hovered over her wound, gentle despite the power that still hummed through him. "You protected her." "I had to." The words came out weaker than she'd intended. She was just a little girl. Something shifted in his expression. Wonder, perhaps, or recognition of something he'd been hoping to find. "This is who you are," he said quietly. "Not your father's daughter, not a traitor's child. This." Around them, the hall was slowly coming back to life. Guards were securing the doors, servants were helping injured nobles, and through it all, Mira could hear the whispers. "She saved Lady Catherine's daughter? Threw herself in front of an assassin? The king's protecting her. Maybe we were wrong." But it was Celeste's voice that cut through everything else, sharp with something that might have been fear. "This proves nothing," she said to anyone who would listen. "Shadow Court assassins coming for her the same night she appears at court. It's too convenient. She's working with them. Enough." Darian's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. He lifted Mira carefully, cradling her against his chest as he rose to his feet. "Anyone who questions her loyalty questions me. Anyone who threatens her threatens me, and anyone who harms her will learn exactly why they call me the Alpha King." The threat hung in the air like a promise of violence. Around the hall, nobles bowed their heads in acknowledgement or submission, but Mira barely heard any of it. She was focused on the way he held her, the reverent care in his touch, the fierce protectiveness radiating from every line of his body. "Why?" she whispered against his chest. "Why would you risk everything for someone like me?" His answer was simple, absolute, and changed everything. "Because you're mine, and I protect what's mine." 3 days passed in a blur of healing and whispered conversations. Mira woke in the royal chambers, her wounds tended by the kingdom's finest healers, and her body wrapped in silk softer than anything she'd ever imagined. Darian barely left her side, working from a chair beside her bed, his storm-grey eyes tracking her every movement with fierce protectiveness. "You should be attending court," she said on the third morning, watching him review documents that looked important enough to change kingdoms. "Court can wait." He didn't look up from the parchment in his hands, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You're more important." "I'm just mine." The word cut through her protest with quiet finality. "You're mine, Mira, and I take care of what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent warmth spiralling through her chest, settling in places that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten they existed. But even wrapped in silk and safety, she could hear the whispers from beyond the chamber doors. The servants who brought her meals spoke in hushed tones about the court's reaction to recent events. Some called her brave for protecting the child. Others called her a manipulator who had orchestrated the entire attack to win the king's favour. Through it all, one voice grew louder than the rest. The Queen Mother was gathering support. "She has to go," Mira heard her saying to someone in the corridor outside. "This obsession will destroy him and the kingdom both. He needs an heir from noble blood, not bastard children from a traitor's daughter." What if she truly is his mate? The second voice was unfamiliar, but tinged with uncertainty. Mates. The Queen Mother's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Romantic nonsense. He's a king first, and kings marry for political advantage. This infatuation will pass, and when it does, he'll thank me for saving him from his own foolishness. The words settled like ice in Mira's stomach. She'd always known this was temporary. Always known that eventually reality would reassert itself and the bastard servant girl would be sent back where she belonged. But knowing and hearing it spoken aloud were two different kinds of pain. That evening, as Darian worked beside her bed, she finally found the courage to voice what had been building inside her all day. "Let me go." His head snapped up, documents forgotten. "What?" "Let me leave," she said more firmly, even as her heart cracked with each word. "Tonight, before this goes any further, before you have to choose between me and your crown." "There is no choice." His voice was flat, dangerous. There never was. "The Queen Mother is right. My aunt is a bitter woman who confuses politics with life." He set aside his work and leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "She doesn't understand what we have." "What do we have?" The question tore from her throat. 3 days? A moment of madness during a festival? You can't build a kingdom on that. "I can build whatever I want." He stood, began pacing like a caged wolf. "I'm the Alpha King. My word is law." "And your people, your nobles? How long before they rebel against a king who chose a traitor's bastard over the good of the realm?" The words hung between them like a blade. Darian stopped pacing, his hands clenched at his sides. "Is that what you think you are?" he asked quietly. "A burden I'm carrying out of misguided nobility?" "Aren't I?" He moved faster than thought, crossing to the bed and cupping her face in his hands. "You're my mate, my equal, my other half. Everything else is just noise. Beautiful noise that could cost you everything. Then let it." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, gentle despite the fierce determination in his voice. "I've spent 32 years without you. I won't spend another day pretending I can go back to that half-life." "Darian." "No." His mouth covered hers, swallowing her protests in a kiss that tasted of desperation and absolute certainty. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. "We settle this tonight." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving her alone with the silk sheets and the terrible certainty that she was about to lose everything she'd never dared to dream of having. The festival was in its final night. From her window, Mira could see the great courtyard filled with revellers, their laughter and music drifting up on the evening breeze. The same courtyard where she'd first collided with destiny 3 days ago, where her entire world had shifted on its axis, where it was about to shift again. She dressed carefully in the grey wool dress, her dress not borrowed finery, and made her way down through passages that had become familiar. Guards nodded respectfully as she passed, but she could see the questions in their eyes, the uncertainty about what she was and where she belonged. Soon they would have their answer. The courtyard was a sea of colour and movement, couples dancing around bonfires while children chased each other between the market stalls. She'd always loved the festival's final night, the way it felt like the entire kingdom was celebrating together. Tonight it felt like a goodbye. She found a spot near the fountain where she could watch without being noticed, just another servant girl in a simple dress. In the distance she could see the royal platform where nobles gathered around their king, where Darian sat looking like a man carved from stone. Even from across the courtyard, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for something, someone. The Queen Mother stood beside his throne, resplendent in purple velvet and satisfaction. She'd brought reinforcements tonight, a delegation of the kingdom's most powerful lords, all wearing expressions of serious concern. "Your Majesty," Lord Ashford's voice carried across the suddenly quieting crowd, "we come before you tonight as your loyal servants, concerned for the future of the realm." Darian's response was perfectly neutral. "Speak your concerns." "This association with the girl?" Lord Ashford glanced toward where he thought Mira might be sitting, not seeing her in the crowd. "It has created uncertainty among your people, questions about your judgment, about your priorities." "My priorities are my own concern." "With respect, Your Majesty, they're not." The Queen Mother stepped forward. "You are a king before you are a man. Your first duty is to the crown, to the kingdom, to securing the succession with a queen of noble blood." Murmurs rippled through the gathered nobles. Mira could see heads nodding, faces grave with manufactured concern. "We ask only that you put aside this infatuation," Lord Ashford continued, "and choose a bride worthy of your station. Lady Celeste would make an excellent queen. Her bloodline is impeccable, her breeding beyond reproach." "Enough." Darian's voice cut through the night like a blade. He rose from his throne, and even from a distance Mira could see the golden glow beginning in his eyes. "You speak of duty, of worthiness, of bloodlines and breeding as if you're discussing livestock." The courtyard had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on their king as he stepped down from the platform and into the crowd. "Where is she?" he called out, his voice carrying across the entire space. "Where is the woman you're so eager to dismiss?" Mira's heart hammered against her ribs. She could slip away now, disappear into the servant quarters, let him choose the easier path. Let him be the king his people needed rather than the mate she wanted. Instead, she stepped out of the shadows. "Here," she said quietly, but somehow her voice carried. "I'm here." The crowd parted like water as Darian moved toward her, his eyes locked on hers with laser intensity. Behind him, she could hear the Queen Mother's sharp intake of breath, see nobles exchanging glances of shock and dismay. "You came," he said when he reached her. "I had to." She looked up into his storm-grey eyes and saw everything she'd ever wanted reflected back at her. "I couldn't let you face them alone." "I'm never alone when you're here." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing with perfect familiarity. "Are you ready?" "For what?" His smile was fierce and beautiful and full of promises. "To change everything." He turned to face the crowd, her hand still clasped in his, and his voice rang out across the suddenly silent festival. "You want to know about worthiness?" he called out. "About bloodlines and breeding and what makes a queen? Let me tell you about the woman standing beside me." Mira's cheeks burned as thousands of eyes focused on her, but Darian's hand in hers was an anchor. 3 nights ago, assassins attacked our people. While nobles fled and guards hesitated, this woman, this bastard daughter of a traitor, threw herself between a child and certain death. She bled for our kingdom. She sacrificed for our future. His voice grew stronger, more commanding. "That is the blood I want in my children's veins. That is the character I want beside my throne." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Queen Mother stepped forward, her face pale with rage. "You cannot be serious!" "I have never been more serious in my life." Darian raised his free hand, and the golden signet ring of the Alpha Kings caught the firelight. Slowly, deliberately, he slid it from his finger. The entire kingdom held its breath. "Mira Ashwood," he said, dropping to one knee before her as the crowd watched in stunned silence. "Will you be my queen? Will you stand beside me and help me build a kingdom worthy of our children? Will you take this ring and make me the man I was meant to be?" Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, this impossible, powerful, patient man who had seen past every wall she'd built and chosen her anyway. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the moment it settled into place, something shifted in the air around them. Power and magic and destiny all crystallizing into one perfect moment of recognition. When he stood and kissed her, the bond between them flared bright enough that she could swear the entire courtyard could see it. Golden light wrapped around them both, warm and eternal and absolutely certain. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, caught up in the romance and spectacle of their king finding his mate. Others stood silent, processing this impossible turn of events. But through it all, Mira could hear the shift happening. Her king had chosen. And in choosing her, he had chosen love over duty, heart over politics, truth over convenience. "My queen," he murmured against her lips, the words a promise and a prayer and a declaration of war against anyone who would challenge their bond. Around them, the festival burst back into life, but louder now, more joyous. The people had their answer. Their king had found his mate, and she was one of them, a girl who had risen from nothing to stand beside the most powerful man in the realm. And in the distance, barely audible over the celebration, Mira could hear the Queen Mother's furious whisper to her supporters, "This isn't over!" But as Darian spun her around in the firelight, the royal ring heavy and perfect on her finger, Mira found she wasn't afraid any more. Let them come. Let them plot and scheme and whisper their doubts. She was the Alpha King's chosen mate. She was home. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. Mira woke each morning in the royal chambers, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the entire kingdom, and still couldn't quite believe this was her life. The bastard servant girl was gone, replaced by someone who wore silk and jewels and carried herself with newfound confidence. But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. The way Darian would find her in the morning, hair tousled from sleep, and look at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The way he'd take her hand during council meetings, his thumb stroking across the royal ring that now lived on her finger. The way he'd whisper her name against her ear when the weight of royal life became too much. "How are you feeling about the coronation preparations?" he asked one evening as they walked through the royal gardens. The same gardens where she'd once scrubbed steps as a servant, now transformed into their private sanctuary. Mira paused beside the fountain where stone dragons spouted crystal water into the moonlight. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I'm not ready? What if I make a mistake in front of the entire kingdom?" "Then you'll make a mistake," Darian said simply, pulling her into his arms. "And we'll handle it together. That's what partners do." Partners. The word still sent warmth spiralling through her chest. After a lifetime of being nobody to anyone, she was someone's partner, someone's equal, someone's everything. "The nobles are still talking," she said softly. "I can see it in their faces during court sessions. They smile and bow, but their eyes—" "Their eyes will adjust," Darian's voice carried an edge of steel. "Or they'll find somewhere else to serve. I won't have anyone in my court who can't show proper respect to my queen." My queen. He said it like a prayer, like a promise, like the most natural thing in the world. "Lady Celeste came to see me today," Mira said, watching his expression carefully. Something dangerous flickered in his storm-grey eyes. What did she want? To apologise? Mira still couldn't quite believe it herself. She said that watching me protect that child during the attack made her realise she'd been wrong about me, that she'd let jealousy and old resentments cloud her judgment. Darian's eyebrows rose. "And you believed her?" "I want to." Mira leaned into his warmth, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and winter rain. "She's the only family I have left, blood or otherwise. Maybe we could start over." "If that's what you want," Darian said carefully, "then I'll support it, but I'll also keep guards nearby when she visits, just in case." The protectiveness in his voice made her smile. "You can't protect me from every conversation, you know. Watch me." His arms tightened around her, and she felt the familiar golden warmth of their bond pulse between them. "I've waited too long to find you to risk losing you to politics or family drama." They stood together in comfortable silence, listening to the fountain's gentle music and the distant sounds of the castle settling for the night. In 3 days she would be crowned queen before the entire kingdom. In 3 days everything would be official and permanent and real. "Are you having second thoughts?" Darian asked quietly, as if he could sense the direction of her thoughts. "No." The answer came without hesitation. "Never. It's just, sometimes I wake up and expect this all to be a dream, expect to be back in the kitchens, scrubbing floors and trying not to be noticed." "You were always meant for more than that." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lips. "Even when you couldn't see it yourself, you were meant for this. For me. For us. How can you be so sure?" His smile was soft and certain. "Because I've never been more myself than I am when I'm with you. Because you challenge me and support me and make me want to be the king this realm deserves. Because when I look at you, I see our future, children with your courage and your heart, a kingdom built on love instead of fear, a life worth living instead of just enduring." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Children?" "Someday," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When you're ready, when we're ready, little ones with your eyes and your stubborn chin who'll drive us both to distraction." The image he painted was so vivid, so beautiful, that it took her breath away. A future she'd never dared to imagine, now spread out before her like a gift. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling both new and ancient on her tongue. "And I love you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises. More than kingdoms, more than crowns, more than life itself. When they broke apart, she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Heat and desire and barely leashed hunger. "Come to bed with me," he said quietly. Not as a king and his future queen, but as Darian and Mira, as mates who have found each other at last. She nodded, suddenly breathless, and let him lead her back into the castle. Their chambers were warm and golden in the candlelight, rose petals scattered across silk sheets in preparation for their return. Someone, probably the romantic head housekeeper, had thought to make their first real night together as magical as possible. "You don't have to," Darian said as she hesitated near the bed. "We can wait until after the coronation, until you're completely ready." "I am ready." And she was, after weeks of growing closer, of learning to trust this impossible love. She was finally ready to give him everything. "I choose this. I choose you." "Then come here," he said softly, "and let me show you how precious you are to me." What followed was tender and passionate and perfect, a claiming that had nothing to do with politics or duty and everything to do with two souls recognizing their other half. He worshipped her with his hands and mouth and body, showing her pleasures she'd never imagined, making her feel beautiful and desired and utterly cherished. And when she fell asleep in his arms afterward, sated and happy and completely his, she dreamed of golden-eyed children and a kingdom where love was stronger than bloodlines. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Mira woke to find Darian already dressed and pacing, his face grim as he read a message that had arrived with the dawn. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up and pulling a silk robe around herself. "The Shadow Court investigation is complete," he said without looking up. "We know who gave them information about your presence at the feast." I settled in her stomach. "Who?" "Lord Ashford." Darian's voice was flat with controlled rage. "The same lord who stood before the kingdom 3 nights ago demanding I set you aside. He's been feeding information to our enemies for months, hoping they'd eliminate what he saw as a threat to his political ambitions." "My God." Mira pressed a hand to her throat. He was willing to have me killed to advance his agenda. He was willing to have you killed to clear the path for his own daughter to marry me. Darian finally looked at her, and the fury in his eyes was terrifying. He thought if you were gone, I'd choose Lady Catherine Ashford as my queen, a nice, controllable bride who would dance to his tune. The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. What will you do? What any king does with traitors. Darian's smile was sharp as a blade. He'll be arrested today, his lands will be forfeit, his family will be stripped of their titles. And Lady Catherine had no knowledge of her father's schemes. Darian's expression softened slightly. She'll be allowed to keep her personal fortune and find a new life elsewhere. I'm not in the business of punishing children for their parents' sins. Unlike her own experience, Mira realised, unlike the way she'd been branded and cast out for her father's treason. The irony is almost poetic, Darian continued, as if reading her thoughts. He conspired with enemies of the realm to eliminate the daughter of a traitor, only to become a traitor himself. Will there be others? Mira asked quietly. Other nobles who can't accept what we are? Probably. Darian sat on the edge of the bed and took her hands in his. But they'll learn to live with it or find themselves exiled. I meant what I said at the festival, Mira. You're my queen, my mate, my choice. Anyone who can't respect that has no place in our kingdom. Our kingdom. She was still getting used to the possessive pronouns, the way he spoke of shared ownership and joint responsibility. 2 more days until the coronation, she said softly. 2 more days until the entire realm witnesses what I declared that night, that you belong beside me, that our bond is unbreakable, that our future is written in starlight and destiny. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, across the royal ring that caught the morning light. Are you ready? Mira looked at this man who had seen past every wall she'd built, who had chosen her over duty and politics and the easy path, who loved her not despite her humble origins, but because of the strength those origins had given her. Yes, she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. I'm ready to be your queen. Good. His smile was warm and proud and full of love. Because I'm ready to spend the rest of my life showing you exactly how precious you are. Outside their windows, the kingdom was waking to news of Lord Ashford's arrest and the confirmation that their future queen was exactly where she belonged. Some would celebrate. Others would grumble and plot and eventually accept or leave. But here, in this moment, wrapped in silk and love and the unshakable certainty of their bond, Mira had never been happier to call anywhere home. 2 months later, the kingdom had never been more prosperous. Mira stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the morning market come alive in the courtyard below. Merchants called out their wares, while children chased each other between the stalls, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. The same courtyard where she'd first collided with Darian during the Harvest Moon Festival, now transformed into a symbol of everything they'd built together. Admiring your kingdom, Your Majesty. Darian's arms slipped around her waist from behind, his warmth chasing away the morning chill. Our kingdom, she corrected automatically, leaning back against his chest. The correction had become second nature over the weeks since her coronation, but it still sent a thrill through her every time she said it. Look there, he murmured against her ear, pointing toward a young woman at one of the flower stalls. Do you recognise her? Mira studied the girl's face and gasped. Lady Catherine Ashford. Former Lady Catherine, Darian corrected gently. She's opened a flower shop with what remained of her personal funds. By all accounts, she's quite happy. It was a small thing, but it mattered. After her father's arrest and execution for treason, Catherine could have fled the kingdom in shame. Instead, she'd chosen to stay and build an honest life. The people had accepted her, just as they'd eventually accepted their bastard-born queen. The people are talking, Mira said softly, watching the easy interactions in the marketplace, but not the way they used to. What are they saying now? A smile tugged at her lips. that their queen walks among them, that she remembers their names and asks about their children, that she understands what it means to work for a living. She turned in his arms to face him. They're saying they finally have a ruler who sees them. Because they do. His storm-grey eyes were warm with pride. You've given them something they've never had before, a queen who truly knows them. It was true. In the weeks since her coronation, Mira had insisted on visiting the markets, the farms, the workshops where ordinary people lived their lives. She'd sat in kitchens and listened to mothers worry about their children. She'd walked through fields with farmers and learned about crop rotations. She'd held babies and comforted the sick and showed up for the daily business of being alive. The nobles had been scandalized. The people had been enchanted. "Your Majesties?" A soft knock at the chamber door interrupted her thoughts. "Come," Darian called out, though his arms remained firmly around her waist. Thomas entered with a scroll bearing an ornate seal. "A message from the Northern Territories, Your Majesty. Duke Ravenscroft requests an audience." Mira stiffened slightly. Duke Ravenscroft, Celeste's father, one of the most powerful lords in the realm. Also one of the few who had never quite accepted her elevation to queen. "What does he want?" Darian asked, his voice carefully neutral. "To discuss his daughter's future, according to the message." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Lady Celeste wishes to formally request a position at court." "Here?" Mira asked, "after everything that happened?" "She's been different since the coronation," Darian said thoughtfully. "The reports from the Northern Territories all say the same thing. She's thrown herself into charitable work, helping orphans and widows. Some say she's become a different person entirely." Mira considered this. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately, to protect the peace they'd built, but a larger part remembered the sister she'd once hoped to have, before jealousy and politics had poisoned everything between them. "What kind of position is she seeking?" she asked Thomas. "Head of Royal Charities, Your Majesty. She wishes to coordinate relief efforts for the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens." "That's actually perfect for her," Mira said slowly. "She understands loss now. She understands what it means to fall from grace." She looked up at Darian. "What do you think?" "I think," Darian said carefully, "that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the work. But I also think we should meet with her first. See if this change is genuine." "Agreed." Mira turned to Thomas. "Please tell Duke Ravenscroft that Lady Celeste is welcome to petition for the position in person. We'll hear her request next week." Thomas bowed and departed, leaving them alone again. "You're giving her a chance," Darian observed. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Mira said. "Look at me. I went from traitor's bastard to queen. Look at Catherine Ashford, from disgraced noble to respected merchant. If we can change, so can she. This is why I love you." Darian cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "This generous heart of yours, this ability to see the best in people." "I learned it from you," she said softly. "You saw the best in me when I couldn't see it myself, because it was always there waiting to be discovered." He kissed her forehead gently. "Speaking of discoveries, I have something for you." "Another gift?" Mira laughed. "Darian, you spoil me terribly." "It's my right as your devoted husband." He led her back into the chambers, stopping at his desk to retrieve a leather portfolio. "This one is special." Inside the portfolio were architectural drawings, detailed plans for what looked like a small palace or large manor house. "What is this?" she asked, studying the elegant lines and spacious rooms. "Our summer retreat," he said, his voice warm with excitement. "I commissioned it after you mentioned missing the quiet of the countryside. It's being built in the northern hills, about a day's ride from the capital. Somewhere we can go when royal life becomes too overwhelming." The drawings showed gardens and terraces, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows, bedrooms designed for children who didn't yet exist but were already hoped for. "A nursery wing," she observed, touching the plans with reverent fingers. "For some day," he said softly, when you're ready." "I might be ready sooner than you think." The words escaped before she could stop them, and she felt heat bloom in her cheeks. Darian went very still. "Mira, it's too early to be certain," she said quickly, "but I'm late, and I've been feeling different, tired in the mornings, emotional about strange things." He stared at her for a long moment, and then his face transformed with pure joy. "You think you might be pregnant?" "Maybe." She bit her lip nervously. "How do you feel about that possibility?" His answer was to sweep her up in his arms and spin her around the room, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I feel like the luckiest man in any kingdom," he said roughly, "to have found my mate, my queen, my everything, and now possibly the mother of my children as well." "Our children," she corrected, just as she'd corrected his earlier words about the kingdom. "Our children." He placed his hand over her still flat stomach with infinite tenderness. "Little ones who will grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they belong, knowing that their parents chose each other against all odds." The image was so perfect, so beautiful, that it brought tears to her eyes. A year ago, she would never have dared to dream of such happiness. A family of her own, built on love instead of duty. Children who would never doubt their worth or their place in the world. "Whatever happens," she said, covering his hand with hers, "we'll face it together." "Always," he promised. "From that first moment in the courtyard until the day we draw our last breath, we face everything together." Later that evening, they walked through the same courtyard where their story had begun. The market stalls had been packed away for the day, replaced by couples strolling hand in hand and children playing games in the fading light. "Do you ever regret it?" Mira asked as they paused beside the fountain. "Choosing love over duty? Choosing me over an easier path?" "Never." Darian's answer was immediate and absolute. "Every choice led me to you. Every challenge we've faced has made us stronger. Every obstacle we've overcome has proven that what we have is unbreakable." Even the Queen Mother's continued disapproval. "Especially that," Darian chuckled. "She'll come around eventually, and if she doesn't, that's her loss. She's missing the chance to know an extraordinary woman." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their people enjoy the peaceful evening. In the distance, musicians had begun to play, and the sound of laughter drifted on the warm air. "They're happy," Mira observed, "truly happy." "Because their rulers are happy," Darian replied. "A kingdom reflects its crown, and we, my love, are incandescent." As if to prove his point, a group of children ran past them, calling out cheerful greetings to their king and queen before continuing their game. No fear, no excessive formality, just the natural affection of people who felt seen and valued by those who governed them. "1 year ago," Mira said softly, "I was scrubbing these very stones, trying to stay invisible. Now you're exactly where you were always meant to be." Darian pulled her closer, and she could feel the golden warmth of their mate bond pulsing between them. "Home." "Home," she agreed, and meant it with every fibre of her being. They walked back toward the castle as the first stars appeared overhead, their hands intertwined and their future stretching out before them like a golden road. There would be challenges ahead, there always were, but they would face them together, as partners, as mates, as two souls who had found their perfect match against all odds. Behind them, the courtyard slowly emptied as their people headed home to their own families and their own happiness. And high above, in the royal chambers, candles were being lit in preparation for the return of the king and queen who had reminded an entire kingdom what it meant to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and each other over everything else the world might offer. In the morning there would be duties to attend to, decisions to make, a kingdom to govern, but tonight there was only this, two hearts beating in perfect rhythm, a love that had conquered every obstacle, and the quiet certainty that some stories truly do have happy endings. "Where are you listening from?" Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts about these stories of love conquering all odds. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people discover these tales of fated mates and unbreakable bonds. Thank you for joining Mira and Darian on their journey from servant and king to true partners in love and life.